With about 28 minutes to go before Finance Minister Tito Mboweni is expected to deliver the budget speech, let's cross back to my colleague Nompumelelo Siziba, who is in the parliamentary precinct. Very good afternoon, Nompumelelo. Over to you.
Thanks very much, Nzinga. Well, like you say, it's only a matter of time before we hear the Finance Minister Tito Mboweni deliver the budget speech to us. A lot of anticipation. Where is he going to cut spending? Where is he going to raise revenue? It's a very tricky situation indeed. How is he going to ensure that we don't reach a fiscal cliff, where our debt becomes unsustainable and it becomes very difficult for us to fund it? Already we understand that government is spending about 18% of its expenditure just on servicing our debt alone, which is huge because, of course, the more you're spending on servicing your debt, the less you're able to spend on the priorities, like being able to, pay for education, social services, infrastructure development, and so on and so forth. But anyway, without any further ado, we're just going to get some few comments and analysis from Tabi Lioka, who's with me in our studio, to get a sense from her what we can expect. Thanks very much, Tabi. We did speak earlier. Of course, a lot of anticipation as to what will come out of the speech. What are your thoughts as we head in there?
I think that Minister Mboweni needs to make very, very tough decisions. I think it is now or never. I think that he has to cut on the expenditure side. He doesn't have much room on the revenue side. And we know this because, he can't do much in terms of corporate income tax. Actually, if you look at, compare South Africa's corporate income tax with other countries globally, we are quite on the higher end of the scale. And in an ideal world, we should actually be reducing our corporate income tax, but we can't afford to do so currently. We need to also, we would see some, bracket creep increases in taxes and for those who are high earners. I know that during times when we're literally against the wall, suggestions about a wealth tax come about. I don't think a wealth tax can do much. I think that already we have very few people within the, the tax base, and you don't want to overtax and the very few people. But if you are to be really creative about it, perhaps tax the assets of those who are wealthy versus the income of those who are wealthy. I think that would be a lot more acceptable. And I'm against using, penalizing the poor at a time like this because they really are struggling and they should be assisted.
Yes.
So I don't think that we should, on the expenditure side, do anything on social grants. I think that keeping them as they are already is a penalty for them, given that the cost of living has increased in South Africa.
Yes.
Despite, let's say, if you look at inflation is quite low, interest rates are being cut, etc. Government has to take the heavy load, so they would have to, especially government employees, unfortunately, would have to then, something needs to be done there, and that could be capping the salaries, growth in salaries of government workers. Currently, we are seeing an increase of around 7%. That is, much higher than inflation.
But of course, they can't do that for this year.
They can't do it for this year because they are set agreement. What he can do, though, is renegotiate those terms with Labour and say, look, given where we are in the country right now, and also where we come from when we negotiated these terms, and also given where the inflation is, it's quite onerous. Let's then compromise and maybe not increase and renegotiate some of the terms that were negotiated when the wage agreement was settled. And unfortunately, the heavy loading or the cuts needs to be made on the expenditure side.
Yeah. When the president gave his SONA address a couple of weeks ago, he talked about a couple of issues that got people excited, critical. That is a state bank and a sovereign wealth fund, which he did say that the finance minister will elaborate on today. What's the expectation there?
That would be very interesting because I think that he added to the load that Treasury needs to that Treasury already has, and now Treasury has had to, or will be compelled to find a solution in order to accommodate the President's mention and ideas on this State Bank. I think that the State Bank is quite ironic because it's something that the Finance Minister mentioned before he was a Finance Minister, and now it is literally his baby to deal with. And he has to find money for that. Both a State Bank, you need capital for any bank, and this is the money that we don't have.
At this stage, would those be vanity projects?
They're very lofty projects. You can't have lofty ideas such as a State Bank or a sovereign wealth fund, or even dedicating 62 billion rands towards student housing. It's really great to do, and it's something that we need to do in future. But the South Africa that we have currently, and looking at the fiscus, we cannot behave as if we're wealthy.
Yeah.
And that's what we've been doing all along. We've been living way beyond our means, and that's what got us to where we are, where our debt to GDP will likely be around 6% or even above. I'd be shocked if it's above, but the indication that we got at the MTBPS is that it's hovering in the 6% region.
Of course, Eskom is the biggest fiscal risk to the economy right now. No doubt he's going to speak about it. It doesn't really look as though there's a solution to that 450 billion rand debt, although COSATU came up with their own idea. Some people poo-pooed it. What's going to be the solution there?
Eskom is by far the biggest burden on the fiscus, and I think second is our state-owned entities. And I do think that we are allocating a bit too much money on an asset that may not be fixed in time, and I worry that we are making a big sacrifice and utilizing money that can go elsewhere. And I say this because as much as we've allocated huge sums of money towards saving Eskom, we've also said industry and mining companies can start generating their own electricity. Now, industry and mining sector are number 2 and 3 in terms of sales and revenue for Eskom. So if, let's just say, 100% of all of them decide to generate their own electricity, you'll be left with municipalities. And already we know that households, there's a lot of subsidization that is done. So industry does subsidize households when it comes to electricity. So now you're removing that subsidization, which means that electricity prices for households will increase as a result. You're also seeing the demand for electricity falling as more and more households are now self-generating and are getting off the grid. And then so all these dynamics are working at the same time, and they're working against Eskom, the very Eskom that you've allocated billions and billions and hundreds of billions towards salvaging. And then on top of that, you've also announced that there'll be a competing power generating power station, electricity generating utility company. And now that will also compete with Eskom. And as behavioral, I guess finance would have it, and if you look at how we behave in terms of how we allocate our funding, a lot of funders will not go towards funding Eskom. They'll obviously move to the new utility company, which is more renewable and more.
But do you think government has thought this through? This picture that you're painting, that basically people are going to be self-generating. You've got this massive Eskom debt bubble and expense bubble, and at the end of the day, there won't be any customers because people will be self-reliant.
They're moving increasingly towards being self-reliant, and I don't know if government has thought it through, but then government, I guess if you're government, you're thinking that you have this utility company and a lot of people are still reliant on Eskom, and that you'll provide a service. Now, unfortunately, when you've failed people for so long, people then move away and find other means and find other solutions, and that will be what we see. We'll see that increasingly, because I think many people in South Africa are now not as confident as they used to be in terms in our government's ability to provide certain services.
Yeah. Tabi, we're going to leave it there because I know that you are going to join everyone in the gallery to observe the proceedings there in Parliament. So that was Tabi Yoka. She's an independent economist. Of course, we are now going to be crossing over to Zwelinzima Vavi. He's addressing protesters. The SAFTU and AMCU and a body that represents unemployed people have come out to basically march and protest against government policies, to say that, you know, government policies are not relating to labour needs nor those who are unemployed, and they're protesting here in Parliament to, you know, to speak their voice. We're going to go for a quick break and no doubt we'll go back to that protest.